Apples of Gold presents a Christmas story from the old frontier, The Preacher, the Bells, and Trigger Joe. And here to tell the story is our raconteur, Ken Guthrie.
Joe Parson didn't intend to be a preacher. His father was a famous lawman, and Joe hoped to be one too. He loved the feel of a gun, not because it was a weapon to kill, but because it was an instrument for sport. When Joe Parson was a boy, he broke his right wrist. This gave the wrist a distinctive outward bend when he would draw his gun, but it never affected his speed or his accuracy. For years afterward, he practiced shooting targets, and by the time he was 20, he had won every contest he entered. He gained the admiration and respect of everyone for his ability to draw first and hit the mark. Joe's father began taking him along on posses when tracking outlaws, and Joe's ability to draw first and shoot straight caused the capture of many tough outlaws. His reputation spread, and he became known as Trigger Joe. Then something happened that changed everything for young Joe Parson. The Wagner gang had a connection with a gambler in the saloon in Joe's hometown. They planned to get Joe into a fight and wound him so that he wouldn't be able to help out when Wagner raided the town. Even that outlaw, Jesse Wagner, respected Trigger Joe. One day, when Joe was in the saloon, the gambler and his friends talked him into sitting in on a card game. They planned to let Joe see the gambler cheating. One of their men, standing outside the open window, was to shoot Joe as soon as the argument started, and Joe stood up to draw. And on that fateful day, Joe reacted just as they thought he would.
There. Let's see you beat that, Wickley.
Looks like he's got you, Dave.
Lady Luck's with you this evening, Joe.
Big jackpot for you, Joe.
Wait a minute. Maybe I can beat that, Parson. There. The ace of diamonds. What do you say to that?
Why, you dirty, sneaking cheat. I saw that card come right out of your sleeve.
Holy mackerel, Parson. You killed Dave Wickley.
I wasn't looking. Anybody see what happened?
Wickley and Parson shot each other.
Somebody go get the sheriff. The old man's going to have to arrest his own son for murder.
Oh, my, no.
No. Stay where you are, all of you. I'm leaving. And the first one who makes a move will get led. I'm backing to the door, and no one's gonna stop me.
Joe Parson got out of the saloon to his horse. Then he hit the trail, covering his tracks in every possible way to throw off the posses he knew would soon be following him. He found a deserted prospector's cabin in the hills. Hanging inside was a dark suit, neat but shabby, that had been left by the former tenant. Joe needed supplies, so hiding his gun in the cabin, he put on the dark suit, which fit fairly well, then headed for a nearby town where he wasn't known by sight. He went to the general store when he arrived in Milton.
Howdy, mister.
Good morning.
Haven't seen you around here before. You must be a stranger in Milton.
That's right, I am. I come in to get a few supplies.
If you're fixing to stay in a town for a while, we might as well get acquainted. My name is Cumberledge, Stephen Cumberledge. What handle do you go by?
Parson,
A parson, huh? Well, I should have known. You was a preacher, seeing how you was dressed.
Huh?
Well, we was expecting a Parson Norval to preach in our new meeting house, but word came he went somewheres else. He must have heard about Dale Cooper. Dale is a big, tough hombre who runs the saloon and who says he won't let any preacher come here, might interfere with his business.
I see. Well, I'm not interested in staying.
Oh, I wish you was interested in staying, preacher.
But see here, I can't preach. I'm not really...
Well, we don't expect to get a preacher who'll roll us in the aisles with flourishing talking. All we want is one to read the good book to us on Sunday and say a few words now and then. Why don't you think it over, preacher?
Well, Mr. Cumberledge, you've given me an idea. A great idea.
And the idea was that no one would ever think of looking for an outlaw posing as a preacher. At first, it was just a way to hide. Then, strangely, the more Joe read the Bible and tried to put over its meaning to his flock, the more he came to believe what he was preaching, and that preaching was what he really wanted to do the rest of his life. He discovered he had a natural flair for writing and delivering sermons. In a short time, the little group of followers loved and respected their new pastor, and the congregation began to grow. Now Dale Cooper waited a while before showing his hand. Then one afternoon he stopped Joe Parson in front of the cafe and within earshot of some of the townspeople.
Howdy, preacher. I want a few words with you.
Of course. You're Dale Cooper, aren't you?
That's right, I am. I guess you heard by now that I don't like preachers.
I did hear something like that, but I guess I can live through it, Cooper. Having your dislike, I mean.
How dare you, you word-slinging, song-singing coyote? It would give me great pleasure to beat you to the draw and fill you with lead. But since you don't carry a gun...
I wonder if you would be as brave without your gun, Cooper.
Trying to be funny, aren't you, preacher? Save it for the next time you preach, wherever that might be.
In the Milton Meeting House next Sunday morning, if you care to attend.
Oh, is that so? Well, listen to this and get it straight. From now, you're out of a job, understand? So you pack up and get out of town.
I like Milton, and I have to admit, I like to preach. So I'm staying.
Now you look, preacher. Let this sink into that sanctimonious brain of yours. If I catch you preaching in that meeting house on Sunday, I will break every bone in your body. You understand me?
Everybody in Milton was waiting to see what the preacher would do. The tension grew higher as Sunday approached and the preacher stayed on. Now, Joe wasn't afraid of Cooper and was determined to see it through. He was young, strong, and courageous, fully Cooper's equal in a fair fist fight. When Sunday morning arrived, Joe was at breakfast in the storekeeper's home where he boarded. Stephen's wife, Kate, was feeding him breakfast.
Preacher, do you have some more pancakes? I made them especially for you.
In that case, Kate, I will take some more.
I guess Kate figured she'd get salvation for sure if she fills the preacher up with good food along with her praying.
It sure helps the preacher a lot, I will say that much.
Oh, I declare, between the two of you, I get so flustered that I hardly know what I'm doing. But I like it. More coffee, preacher?
No, thanks.
Let's face facts, preacher.
Well,
Today's the day, you know. That hombre Cooper is a mighty mean customer. Likely to gun you down if he gets mad enough.
Stephen, he wouldn't.
Well, I think the preacher ought to carry a gun to protect himself.
No, I'll face him without a gun.
I bet that federal marshal would see about Dale Cooper.
Federal marshal?
A fella named John Reese. Seems Harvey Snodgrass was over in Pine Haven yesterday and found out that he's coming here.
Coming here?
Appears he got a line on Trigger Joe. I guess you heard about him.
Yes, I have.
He's another one who'd scare the daylights out of Dale Cooper. I bet you. Used to be a young lawman, you know, before he got accused of killing. You can spot Trigger Joe right off, I hear, by the funny way he has of drawing his gun. But they say he draws like lightning. When the federal marshal gets here...
Excuse me. I have to go now.
Stephen, whatever did you say to make him look like that?
I don't know, Kate, but he looked downright scared. I'm afraid that's because of Dale Cooper. We're going to lose another preacher.
Well, the storekeeper was right. Joe left the house and rode out of town that Sunday morning. However, it wasn't Dale Cooper that scared him, but the federal marshal, John Reese. Parson thought the marshal had found out that the new preacher was really Trigger Joe, who had been accused of murder. So the preacher took his horse and rode out of Milton that morning without a word to anyone. It was snowing heavily and steadily getting worse, yet the whole town turned out to gather in front of the meeting house. Everyone was quiet and tense as Dale Cooper and his cronies approached the saloon.
Here comes Dale Cooper and his bunch. Where's the preacher?
Hey, listen, you bunch of song singers. Where is that big talking preacher of yours?
Dale Cooper, you just ought to be ashamed of yourself. If I was a man, I'd take a whip to you, that's what.
Oh, is that right?
Quiet, Kate. Talking won't do no good now.
Well, where is he? Bring him out and I'll douse him in a snowdrift.
The preacher isn't inside, Dale. He isn't here yet.
And he isn't coming here either. I saw him lighting out of town like a scared rabbit more than an hour ago.
Well, he always yellow, and he won't be back.
Listen, all you hombres have been letting these women drag you to meeting. Come over to the saloon. I'm treating everybody. And from now on, there'll be Sunday meetings in my saloon. You will be saved from that word-slinging preacher. Let's go, man.
So some of the preacher's flock went home, while some of the men, having lost faith in him, followed Cooper to the saloon. Meantime, Joe rode all that day while the snowstorm grew in intensity. He lost all sense of direction, yet he still pressed on. During the night, his horse gave out, but Joe pushed forward on foot. It was a terrible ordeal. He didn't dare stop for fear of freezing to death. He had no food, and the sharp driving snow blinded him. Finally, his steps faltered. He felt he could go no further.
I can't go no further. Those sermons I gave, the words I believed in, wanted them to believe in. Was I just a fool? Or do they mean something? They do mean something. They do. Jesus, save me. Please save me. No, bells? I can hear them. No, it couldn't be. Yes, I do hear them. There's a mission out here somewhere. Lord, keep 'em ringing. Please keep 'em ringing till I find my way, just please.
The sound of the mission bells urged Joe on and gave him new strength. Joe pushed on. Exhausted, nearly blind from the snow, and half frozen from the wind and cold, he followed the sound of the bells until he finally reached the mission, then collapsed. The mission's pastor, hearing Joe's shouts for help, took him in. Joe remembered nothing until he opened his eyes and saw the pastor beside his cot.
Are you awake?
Where am I?
At the Union Baptist Mission.
You're the pastor.
Yes, my name is Jeremiah Murray.
Those bells, must have been the...
Yes, the mission bells. The wind loosened the ropes and rang the bells.
They led me to this place, Pastor.
Maybe the one who can calm the storms created this one to lead you here, my friend. Here, I brought you some broth, hot broth.
No, not yet, Pastor. I need to talk to you.
As you wish. I observe by your apparel that you're a man of the cloth as well. You may speak freely. I will bear your confidence.
I'm Joe Parson, a self-appointed preacher. I had a congregation in Milton.
I've heard of your good works there. You filled the office well, very well, Preacher Joe.
But I've got to tell you that
Tell me what?
I got to tell you why I was in the storm. I ran away, not because of what they think, but because a federal marshal was coming after me. You see, I'm Trigger Joe.
I know. It was 2 days ago you came to the mission.
2 days?
Yes. Today a friend of mine has come to see me. He's waiting in the outer room. I want you to meet him.
But well, what difference to make? Bring him in, Pastor. I'll sit up.
Will you come in now, my friend?
A man stepped into the room. Joe stared in disbelief at the federal marshal, John Reese. Joe turned with a look of disbelief and anger at the pastor, but before he could speak, the marshal explained that the reason he had been hunting him was to tell him that he had been exonerated. Dave Wickley had been killed by one of his own men. The next day, Trigger Joe was ready and able to travel. As he and the marshal rode, they made plans. Upon reaching the outskirts of Milton that night, Joe waited while the marshal rode to the storekeeper's home and told the storekeeper and his wife to spread the news that the preacher was really Trigger Joe and that he had come back with guns to meet Del Cooper at noon the next day. The word quickly spread. The marshal stationed himself on the roof of a low building overlooking the main street. He wanted to be ready in case Cooper's men started anything. The street was lined with people. Everyone was there, watching, waiting, quiet and tense. At noon, Del Cooper walked from the saloon with his men behind him.
Maybe it's a bluff, Dale.
Don't let the preacher scare you, Cooper.
Draw at 5 yards and plug him, Dale.
Don't worry, boys. I'm sure it's a bluff.
There comes the preacher, boys, down the middle of the street.
He's dressed like Trigger Joe.
He's wearing a gun, all right.
Joe Parson walked slowly and steadily toward Del Cooper. Cooper walked with a sneering smile on his face. But as he neared the oncoming figure, the smile disappeared. His step began to falter. He remembered remarks he had heard in the past.
Trigger Joe's never got beat in a draw.
That hombre never lost a fight.
He always hit the bullseye.
His right wrist sort of bends out when he's getting ready to draw.
Cooper lowered his eyes and stared at the right wrist of the approaching man. He saw that it bent outward. Then he knew. He was facing the famous Trigger Joe. Beads of sweat burst out on his brow and ran down his face. His mouth was dry. He saw eyes everywhere watching him, waiting for him to draw. He dared not. Slowly the two men came together and stopped, 10 paces apart.
I'm waiting, Cooper. Make your move.
Then it happened. The crowd gasped as Del Cooper, the town bully, groveled in the street.
No. No, I can't do it. Look, I'll toss down my gun. Just don't draw, Trigger. Don't shoot me.
Go back to your saloon, Del. I'm going back to my preaching. But remember this. From now on, the preacher in Milton will always carry a gun to protect those who want to practice their faith. I've come home to stay.
Well, that's the story. Those mission bells brought the preacher home, and then the mission bells came home to the preacher. Pastor Murray and his congregation donated them to Preacher Joe and his new church. The first time they rang in Milton was on Christmas Eve, and now they ring every Christmas Eve at the midnight watch service.
And the angel said unto them, Fear not, for behold, I bring unto you good tidings of great joy, which shall be unto all people. For unto you is born this day in the city of David a Savior, which is Christ the Lord. And now the choir will sing, I heard the bells on Christmas Day.
If you look closely at the choir on the back row, you will notice a man singing bass second from the right. It's the former saloon owner, Del Cooper.
You have been listening to an Apples of Gold radio adaptation of The Preacher, the Bells, and Trigger Joe. Featured were Ken Guthrie, Harper Emsch, Matthew Emsch, with Phyllis Osenton and Danny Webb. Apples of Gold is directed by Danny Webb and produced by Rodney Pell. This is Rodney Pell speaking.